All right, we're on.
All right, thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Sean Fantuzzi, co-host Will Rattel, and we are bringing in the rugby strength coach himself, Keir Wenham-Flatt of William and Mary. Welcome to our freshly built podcast, and you're number one guy.
Pleasure to be here, guys. How's it going?
Great. I'm excited for this. Definitely.
Yeah. I must say also, you have been, since day one, a proud representative of Friday, Sean.
Thank you. I love my Fridays too. So, fun fact, if you ever do make it up towards the Philly way, there is an Amish market. Like, everything in this market's a massive, huge market. Vegetables, sweets, goods, foods, everything like that. They do their own apple and blueberry fritters, homemade. Like, you have to.
Hey, I forgot to tell you this. The guy that does my tats might be in Philly next week, so I might be up there, yeah.
Hit me up.
Yeah. It's either going to be Philly or New York.
Sounds good. Yeah. I'm about 25, 30 minutes outside the actual city, but
cool.
Nobody would try. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. We're excited to get to talk to you, get our viewers a little bit of a taste of what you bring to the table from the performance aspect and just a movement general aspect. So why don't you start off, little Spark Note version of yourself? Who are you? And what brings you over to the States?
Failed athlete. 5'10", white, untalented, slow, not brave. Realized that about the age of 15, 16, and it wasn't going to be conducive to a career in professional rugby. So academics came easy to me. I started training 20-ish years ago. And, eventually I was enthusiastic about the training, thought, I can still be involved in sport if I do this. And with a minor blip of attempting to start a degree in psychology, I've been doing it ever since. Rugby was my love when I was growing up. So that was the sport that I pursued. I just did nothing but rugby for the best part of 10 years. And by the end of, let me think, I started in England, I went to Australia, I did 3 seasons in Argentina, I did 2 seasons in Japan. And about midway through that, I thought, I'm tired of rugby for now. So I decided to move the goalpost and thought, I want to work in the NFL. So it took a year, it took a year of paperwork and a bunch of money to get the right to live and work in the States. But I've been here since January 2018 trying to work towards that goal.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How was your time over in Japan and Australia? Because Australia is a place that I want to go with my wife for our honeymoon. So you got any recommendations?
Yeah. Well, from a personal perspective, it's if you're gonna live in another country, pick an Anglophile country is going to be the easiest. The transition to Japan is much harder than the transition to like an Australia or a New Zealand or somewhere else. From a personal perspective, it was Sydney is just like, it feels otherworldly because Australia is so big. And the population of Australia is so densely concentrated into, I think it's like 98% of the population live in 2% of the land mass of the country. There's 5 big cities, and that's basically it. Yeah. And
how North Dakota is, right, Will?
Yeah.
So much land mass, 3 cities.
Yeah. So when you fly out of Australia, you got New Zealand, which is 3 hours away. And after that, the next closest country is 6 hours away. It's just a crazy big place, and it feels isolated. And where I was in Sydney, there's all these Brits, Irish tourists, and it felt very much like the world's most beautiful bus station. Everyone was coming in or going, and it didn't feel to me like I'm really settled here. It was beautiful. It was like a glamorous lifestyle, but I always felt like I was going to end up here for whatever reason. And then from a professional perspective, it was, I refer to it as the worst period of my career because I touched down and within, 4 or 5 months, I was the head of academy for the richest rugby league club in the world, the current world champions. the current NRL champions, soon to be world club champions. And within 3 weeks, I got bumped up to be the senior speed, strength, and power coach.
Wait,
So, you know,
is that the All Blacks?
No. This is rugby league. So
Okay,
this is
my fault.
Domestic league competition. Generally speaking, if you're the champions of that country, you're the best club in the world, and that's what we did in the March. And, you know, if you write the Hollywood script of strength coach goes to foreign country and lands that job within 6 months, on paper, it looks fantastic. You're 10 minutes from Bondi Beach, your salary doubles, all that kind of stuff. And it was horrible. I hated it. So would I change it? No, I wouldn't.
A lot of people doing it.
But, you know, personally and professionally, did I think it was the dream? No. And then Japan is like
Quarantine, I got furloughed.
the reason I went to Japan. I actually had a contract signed
Me,
in the UK after the World Cup. So I'd signed with a second tier club in England. It was a head coach that I was familiar working with, and
so
you know,
let me know if there's any kind of like.
It was like a safe move, but then I got the offer to go to Japan. And now the fact that they offered triple the money was an incentive, but what really convinced me was it's another country, it's another chance to get out of my comfort zone, to work with like really high level players, some of which were the All Blacks that won the World Cup. And I have this thing about when I take a job, I kind of joke that I have to feel like I need to take a shit when I make the decision, like, oh my God, what am I about to do? And when I was at that fork in the road, that's why I picked Japan. So I went to Japan, and, you know, as a place to live, it's crazy. You walk down the street where everything's in English. You just subconsciously know, pay attention to that, ignore that, pay attention to that, all that kind of stuff. You walk around downtown Tokyo and you're just like taking everything in. It's like an information overload. And again, it's like, it's so weird. They're an island, you know, reasonably close to Korea, but they're such an insular society. It's like another world. You can see they've just evolved in complete isolation from Europe. And you're like, that's what happens when you spend a couple of thousand years in complete isolation and you walk around that society. It's incredibly homogenous society. The country as a whole, only 2% of people are not ethnically Japanese. And then you think there's a lot of rural places in Japan. So you think like all the non-Japanese people are in Tokyo, and you go outside of Tokyo and you walk around the country, like, it's crazy.
Wow, I did not realize that. That's really cool. That was a really cool, environment to be in. Yeah.
You know, I think it's like, I like collecting those experiences and biting off more than I can chew, and jump off the cliff and assemble the airplane on the way down.
Yeah. So how did you get to William and Mary? And just tell us about your time there. You said you're working with football primarily. Mm-hmm. What does your program typically look like from a macro cycle perspective? How do you program throughout the year? And then if you want to get into details, like, I'd love to hear the details of what your day-to-day training looks like with those guys.
Yep. So the reason I ended up at William and Mary was I was going to have a baby, and Richmond didn't give me health insurance, and they paid me not a lot. I'll say that.
I'm going to yell at my guy Jay DeMeo for that one. But.
Nah, it's not Jay's fault.
No, I know. No, Jay is good people.
Man.
Jay is good people.
Yeah. So it was just that time, you know, like I was having a baby, you know, and it was like a shotgun baby. Like, he was born pretty much a year to the day that we met. So that's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. And it was like, I met Eric at Track Football Consortium that year. I always kind of wind him up that we'd met once before, but he didn't remember me. When he was at Kentucky and I was in Argentina, we met in 2015, very briefly. And we'd connected at Track Football Consortium, and we got to see one another's presentations and kind of, you know, talk to one another a little bit. And he had seen me present again at Central Virginia that year. So I did a big presentation on return to play for strength coaches. And without knowing it, he and I had discussed a lot of the similar concepts I had in my presentation. So like global load management, integrated return to play, basically that kind of like big high performance perspective. And it was after that he asked me to interview and come in to work with him at William & Mary. So I think the reason the project is so ambitious is because he'd attempted to do it at Kentucky and at the Texans. I'd attempted to do it at Argentina and Japan. And now we're attempting to do it with 23 sports.
Yeah.
So that's, I think he wanted someone that had attempted to do it. I'd probably done a worse job than him doing it. He plays the game a lot better than me, but he wanted somebody that had the experience of trying to do it and understands the model that's in his head. So that's why I think like we work well together as well, because what we have strengths at, we complement one another. So I would say he's an excellent administrator, talks to coaches, very polished presenter in how he presents the data. And then I would say I am a lot more of kind of in the trenches technician, at the coalface kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's quite a complementary relationship. In terms of how we map out the programming, I think there's a few different plates that you have to spin within sports performance, and this is applicable to all sports, but we'll talk about it in the context of football. Obviously, sport performance is going to be determined by the four coactive model. So you have your physical, tactical, technical, psychological. You can kind of include intellectual and health as like an underpinning to that, but those are the big four. And you have to understand that at the business end of the season, you have to have the highest sum development of all of those four areas to fully realize potential on the field. And primarily that's going to be psychological preparation and the quality of the technical, tactical game plan that determines success. Because if you look at the volatility week to week, the physiological variables are fairly stable. So if they're not changing, the change in results is not attributable to the physical preparation. What the physical prep does is it gives intensity and repeatability to the technical, tactical game plan. You can have a little bit of an impact on technical skill development, again, through making it more robust, more intense, more repeatable. But realistically, our job as strength and conditioning coaches, we're responsible for physical preparation, which is to give intensity, repeatability, and sustainability to high intensity sporting skill. So what's average distance in a football game? Let's say 6,000 yards. Okay. If you take 6,000 yards and divide it by 3.5 hours, it's like a trot around a track and field athletics track, right? Mm-hmm. So why is it they get tired? Well, they get tired because it's not the average demands that's taxing to the system. It's the high intensity actions. And when you look at them from a tactical perspective, it's that stuff that makes the difference. You're not getting a contract based on how quickly you run to the next play before you get your pants pulled down. You're getting paid for what happens in those 6 seconds between the whistles, right? So if you have that philosophy and you say, okay, what's the stuff that I do better than anyone else in my position, or what my position gets paid for, or what the best person in my position does? The answer to that question is going to be your SPP. And those are the movements that you have to try and maximize speed of movement in. And obviously you're going to look at the physical qualities that underpin that, in addition to those movement patterns. So it's the biodynamics, which is the movement pattern, the motor qualities, that is, which physical qualities are most correlated with output in those patterns. Then you're going to look at the bioenergetics, which is the time motion characteristics of the sport that will draw upon the energy systems that contribute to that. Now, here's the problem. When you are training for the sport, it isn't necessarily, training for robustness in the sport, to be robust to camp, to be robust to an 11-game schedule and all the practices. Training with the volume, intensity, frequency, density that makes you robust to that environment isn't necessarily going to be the kind of training that, one, optimally develops a physical characteristic, and two, develops the physical weaknesses that you have that may be a rate limiting factor within your system. So if you imagine a barrel made up of different staves and one of them short, let's say we have 10 and one of them is really short. If we make the other 9 taller, is the barrel going to fill up any better? No. There's going to be one limiting factor within the system that has to be addressed to raise the system as a whole. Athletes are the same. Okay, so then we've got two competing things that we have to account for. One is the demand of the sport and the position, and the other is what their individual limiting factor is going to be. So that's basically off-season and pre-season. And then we'll have, little bits here and there. Spring ball to me is done, but we'll get to that. So if we go from after spring ball and we say, right, we do spring ball really, really early to maximize that period where we can address the weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So you spend the first few weeks of February doing this because spring balls come that early, but we actually had spring ball done and dusted by spring break this year. That means we have a couple of weeks of GPP at the end of March, and we had all of April, all of May, and that was our off season. So we're going to look at your testing data. How do you compare to your positional norm for all of the different things that we think are important? What does the position require in our opinion? What's the feedback of your coach? What's the feedback of you? So we'll look at things like anthropometrics, maximal strength, maximal power, speed, maybe conditioning, stuff like that. And we're going to say, based on that information, plus training age, because that's really, really important, where do we feel the greatest return on the investment of our time and effort is going to be relative to your weaknesses? And we actually run 4 different programs. It could be 5, but we didn't have anyone that exceeded the power metrics that we wanted to see. We run those simultaneously during the off season. So we have an injury risk mitigation group, because if you can't stay on the field or hang with the training schedule required, all bets are off. So if you're always injured, we're gonna hammer those limiting factors specific to the injury. Then we have an anthropometric group. So if, for example, you're the classic underfed freshman and we know that you're 30 pounds under where the average for your position needs to be, 1, we didn't recruit well, and 2, you have to start eating a lot and lifting a lot. So we're going to have a training program that focuses on that. If you look at Dr. Ray's stuff from Alabama, once you start to get to around a 1.7 body weight squat, you're not going to see any further transfer from the squat to sprinting and jumping, which is primarily the role of everyone that is not a big. And personally,
yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard that. That's interesting to know. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And here's the thing. Dan Baker, who has a very long history in the NRL, saw the same thing anecdotally. I personally looked at the correlation for my guys in Japan and Argentina, and I looked at the correlation between the sprints, the jumps, and the back squat, and saw that much correlation. No relationship whatsoever. But everybody could achieve a 1.7. So once you get above that, any further increase will not be realized as increased sprinting and jumping on the field of play, for the most part. Now, I can personally get, I'd say 99% of my players to that level in a year. It's pretty interesting, right? Yeah. Once you've done that, you say, okay, what's going to transfer to sprinting and jumping more so than development of maximal strength? And that's when we start to talk about effectively what people call the dynamic effort method. So taking moderate loads and projecting them for maximal intent in velocities that tend to transfer to sprinting and jumping. So that's like our power group. And then eventually, once you get really, really powerful, the only thing that's going to make you faster in sprinting and jump higher is to sprint a lot and jump a lot. So it's like that tube of toothpaste. Press it like this when it's new, toothpaste comes flying out the end. The longer you have the tube of toothpaste, the more precisely you have to push, and you have to push a lot harder to get it to come out. So what we're trying to do,
analogy.
It's stolen. It's stolen from JB Marin, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why we have those programs. Because if I give the same program to everyone, it's going to be okay for some, it's going to be great for others, it's going to be terrible for others. So we do that in the off season. When we get to the preseason, I'll just throw this number out there, right? Typical sprint session, anywhere from 8 to 12 sprints, all out effort is a real good dosage of sprint training. How many sprints do they have to do in, let's say we do 2 of those a week. We're going from 16 to 24 sprints. Are they going to have to do more than that in the dead of camp? You bet they're going to have to do more. Yeah. So that's when we switch the focus and say, okay, what does the sport demand to be robust and to thrive in that environment? And how do we reverse engineer it? And typically what we're looking at is going to be first, a period of accumulation of sport-specific efforts. So write down on the postcard, what do you do? If you're in the box, your job is to, if you're a lineman, your job, or offensive lineman, your job is to move laterally and to move 300-pound human beings where they don't want to go. And that's about it. If you're a D end, your job is to run really fast curves and to destroy people. If you're a linebacker, it's going to be short sprints and hits. If you're a DB, it's probably going to be running and jumping for the most part. So you look at what do they have to do in the worst case scenario for a week? Typically camp, because we still have that cultural shift that has to change in football, but typically camp. So, okay, whatever that demands, work backwards and accumulate that volume in a sensible fashion throughout the months of June and July. Once you get to kind of like late July, August, then what you're going to do, you're going to take all of those efforts that you've accumulated and then you're going to start to condense them to increase the density. Because it's one thing to be able to do what's required of you. It's another thing to do to execute it in the fashion of the worst case scenario. And that's one thing that I've changed in the last couple of years. So you take those efforts. So you say, right, okay, it's great that you're able to do 10 fly 10s in a session. But if you got 4 to 5 minutes between them, that's not maybe going to be representative of a special teams practice and you're the gunner. Mm-hmm. So that's when you start to like condense those efforts. And that's what we do towards like end of July, beginning of August. And then we have camp. And the biggest thing that needs to change in football with regard to camp is guys need to be made. It's a two-pronged attack. Guys must be made robust to the demands of camp, and camp must be appropriately dosed. Because what happens is, I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but the more distinct the training environment and the competition environment, the less one helps the other. So if the game itself is 6 seconds on, 35 seconds off for 6 efforts, and you get a big break for the most part, why is it you run 30 plays, go, 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 go? Because you just drop the outputs, and guys are not getting a flavor for the intensity and the pattern of activity that they're actually going to see in games. So what happens? You just go through camp. We call it the survival shuffle, when they just, when they run everywhere in camp.
Oh, camp is all survival mode.
Exactly.
Every single year I've been a part of college football, it's just like people are concerned about it. Like athletes are just concerned about the sheer survival.
And you are training for a task that looks nothing like the environment for which you're supposed to be preparing. So what happens? You get to the first game, play the first game, on the headset, we're not in shape. Well, guess what? You spent a month training for something that doesn't look like this.
Yeah.
So then it gets to game 2, 3, 4. Game 4, firing on all cylinders. I know of someone who worked at a school where the starting wide receiver did more on-feet volume that month than the cross-country team.
Wow.
Exactly. Okay. So if you make athletes more robust for the environment to which they're being exposed in camp, you keep everyone healthy, they're feeling good, and you're not, normally week 2 of camp is like the battle of the Somme. And the flip side to that is to have a sensible progression of volume and intensity via tactical periodization, engaging with coaches, educating them and working with them to not get into that problem in the first place. And that is where the high performance model earns its money. Mm-hmm. Because it's really, really easy to get your pound of flesh and say, well, I made him bigger, stronger, faster, fitter, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But if you don't know what they're about to be exposed to, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And that's actually a much harder conversation to have.
Yeah, so that's got to be the hardest thing to do is just have that conversation with like head coaches because they're so used to like my way or the highway.
And guess what? In most situations, that's the guy that brought you in. So you're going to tell him no? You're going to tell him you don't know what you're doing? So it's like there's all these different things. Ideally, the institution should hire the strength coach directly and not have that coach be answerable to the football coach. I was reading there's basically a psychological bias where your interpretation of whoever pays you or your way of interacting with whoever pays you is inherently biased. And it makes sense. So to be able to remove that bias and basically present information as it is to sport coaches and to get them to take behaviors that are in their own best interest, right now the field is set up in such a way that that's not possible.
Yeah. So to kind of piggyback on that, a quick question I have for you is, you're talking about making sure guys are quote unquote in shape for, or we'll just say they're physically prepared for the demands of their sport, which is football. How do you determine the correct way to go about measuring these metrics so that you can say to the coach, look, these guys are ready to play the game, so that we don't get 1 game, 2 games, 3 games into the season and they look at you and they say they're out of shape. And now you can say to the coach, look, these are the metrics I have. This is what football demands. And we are prepared from a strength and conditioning standpoint.
This is the thing. When you talk about in shape, what you're talking about is if you are not in shape, by definition, there is an imbalance between your ability to resynthesize ATP relative to demand. Okay, so when demand outstrips supply, you have fatigue. When supply meets demand, you're not fatigued. When you are talking about physiological change in strength and conditioning, for the most part, you're talking about the supply side. So it's your ability to produce ATP to meet that demand. You can tweak demand a little bit with mechanical efficiency and how they run, cut, grapple, and so on. But you know the best kind of conditioning program on earth? It's called Don't Make a Mistake. If you are technically, tactically perfect and you know how to pace yourself, when to work, when to rest, and to expend the minimum amount of energy required to achieve a tactical outcome, you'll never be unfit. This is why, you know, if you, I always think combat sports distill the experience for you. I do jiu-jitsu. I've rolled with a guy in his 50s he's an IT worker, but he's been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years. He ties me in knots. And you think, hang on, I do all this stuff on the air nine, I run hills, all this kind of stuff. That's not the full picture of conditioning.
Yeah.
So what you're forced to do as a strength and conditioning coach is say, okay, the variables that are under my control, can I demonstrate they're ready to meet those demands? Okay, so when you talk about this, I'm going to go off the deep end here, but
good. I like it.
Okay. So when you talk about knowledge in sport, right? You talk about knowledge in general. There's a fantastic book I read this year called The Book of Why. Okay. And the heart of that book is, how do we know what we know? Okay. And for example, have you ever heard the phrase, correlation is not causation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is causation?
I don't have an answer.
Exactly, right? I got to 34 without ever thinking, man, what is causation? Okay. But is it fair to say most, if not all, mistakes in sport arise from an inability to see a pattern that isn't there? Sorry, that is there. So there's a pattern of information that you could pick up on, you don't see it. Or you think there's a pattern when there isn't, right? Okay, so for you as a strength coach to see patterns that are there and to ignore the ones that aren't, you need a clear model of reality. And basically, you're going to use testing to inform that, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that is required for causation, which is one variable causes another, if they do well on this test, they're going to do better on the field, is a correlation. Correlation is one of the things that must exist for causation. Doesn't always mean that it's going to be a causative relationship between the two. But if there is no correlation, there's no causation, i.e. it doesn't do shit. All right. So, okay. What is correlation in sport?
All right.
If X demonstrates, if X goes up, Y goes up. Yeah, X goes up, Y goes up. Yeah,
with a degree of consistency,
Mm-hmm.
also known as specificity. So Bondarchuk's work and Verkhoshansky's work is what's the stuff that has a high correlation with the result in the sport? Is it the back squat? Is it the jump squat? Is it the broad jump? Is it the 10-fold jump? Okay. And it turns out when the movement looks really, really similar to the sport in a number of criteria, there's a high degree of specificity and a high correlation. And the stuff that looks nothing like the sport is general and doesn't correlate. Doesn't mean it's worthless, but that's basically it. So there's a high degree of predictive value to highly specific movements. So if we just keep it real simple and say, right, what are the biodynamics of football? What are the movements that I earn my money making? So that I earn my money by doing. Write it down. That's what the test needs to involve. Okay. Physical qualities, we don't really need a test for that because that's what we do in the gym. That's what we do with sprints. We do it with jumps and so on. Okay. But when we get to the bioenergetics, do you agree with the statement that the more closely the time motion demands of a test replicates the sport, the more similarly the energy systems will be taxed?
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What are the demands of football? About 5-6 seconds on, about 35 seconds off. They do 6 of those, and then they get a big rest. And we'll say, like, okay, worst case scenario, goal line to goal line, 12 plays. Right? What does the average 300 look like?
50 seconds to a minute of back and forth. Yeah.
Okay. Also known as 10 times the average play. Would you be confident predicting my ability to run the 100 meters by a timed mile?
No.
Why is it okay in football?
Right. Yeah.
So if you know, look at 300s. Yeah. Football, 300, 1 minute on, 5 minutes off, 1 minute on. Looks nothing like the sport of football. Probably not going to have predictive validity. Half gas is the same. Triple the average football play, and people pat themselves on the back for doing 20 of them. Well, you're in a sport where there's been one 20-play drive in the NFL this century. That's it. 110s, let's put it this way. If I asked you to come into a gym, there's a barbell with 225 pounds on it, and I say, please lift that barbell, Will. Do I have any inference as to your maximal strength?
Most likely not.
Not at all, because if the test isn't maximal,
Yeah.
I don't know your max strength. So if I run 2110s at nowhere near my maximum velocity, have you got any information as to my maximal work capacity?
No.
So this is why we developed a test called the tribe test. So I should have put my name in it, but here's what you do. Sprint as fast as you can. You have 5 seconds to sprint from the goal line to the 20. You cut back and you cover as much distance as you can in the remaining time. The buzzer goes off and your partner writes down how many yards you covered. You then have 25 seconds to walk back to the goal line, turn around, and wait for the next rep. When the buzzer goes, you repeat and you cut off the other leg. And you're going to repeat in that fashion for 12 total reps because it has to suck a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to add up how many yards did you do in total. So we've perfectly replicated the time motion demands of the sport. We can measure it to the yard. It's maximal, so we can infer your capacity. But we can also look at what was your peak output, what was your fatigue decrement, and what was your total capacity for work. So that was a super long answer, but if those numbers go up, we're confident that they're fit for football.
That's that's super interesting. I love that whole 10 minutes of that. It was awesome. How long? So have you been doing that 2 years? The tribe
We've been doing it. We trialed the test December 18, and we've been doing it periodically ever since.
Okay.
And we presented on it at NSCA this January. I presented on it at Track Football Consortium, Notre Dame. And we actually had a couple of teams in the NFL speak to us about it. So it's pretty exciting.
And how did
really should have put your name in that.
Yeah.
And how did the coaching staff when you first brought it to him, said, this is what we're going to do, how did they buy into it? They think it was a good idea? They let you do your thing?
Our head coach is very, very open-minded. And when we explained the test to him, what he said was, this is football. Because it makes sense.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's, I think in football, there's a lot of respect the coaching tree. So if my boss did it this way, I'm going to do it this way. And I think a lot of it as well is the fear of trying something new and it failing, and resistance to change and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you come in with a fresh set of eyes as the rugby guy, you say, why are we doing this? And you can't get a good answer. You start to think, okay, maybe there's another way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that coaching tree thing, like the fear or failure of trying something new, because I've felt that a lot. Just coming into a couple different new places, like being different, but at the same time, like I made sure I sat down with like the captains of the team. Okay, what did you guys do well? Or what did you guys like to do? And then what did you guys not like to do? And it's almost like forming to their culture as opposed to forcing your culture upon them.
Yep. It's a fast way to get fired.
Yeah. Real quick.
Yep.
So that's cool. Thank you for sharing the test, because that's pretty cool. I never really thought about it that way, but that's a really interesting.
I'm gonna have to figure something like that out with my basketball team.
So basketball, I guess you'd have to look at the time motion.
And that's gonna vary, I think, a lot between guard play and post play too. If guys are just sitting down on the block for an entire possession and then they jog back and then they sit on the block on defense, you know.
Football is actually quite an easy sport to program for from a conditioning perspective, because there's such a clear delineation between in play, out of play.
Yeah.
Whereas, when they're in play, it's, foot to the floor. And when they're not, it's like, all right, jog to the next play. Whereas in, rugby, soccer, like more traditional field-based sports like that, there's so much like walking and jogging. But it always boils down to, why are they tired? High intensity. So if nothing else, try and replicate the duration, frequency, density of high intensity sporting actions.
Yeah.
And then, the rest will figure itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean, you got any questions for Keir before we kind of wrap this up? I got one thing that we talked about off camera that I want to get your opinion on, but I want to let Sean go ahead now.
We heard the reps and sets talk. Like, I want to know, like, deep down inside, like, it doesn't have to be about performance, doesn't have to be about anything in particular. Like, what makes you you? Like, what alarm wakes you up every morning? What passion?
It's changed. It has changed.
Obviously, it should change. That's how things. You said it yourself earlier. Like, the goalpost moved.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you, how old are you?
31.
Okay, so I'm 34, right? Mm-hmm. You would have been in the age where, when you were growing up, like Mike Tyson and Eminem were just like gods at what they did, right?
Wait, they're not?
Yeah. Oh no, yeah.
Don't ruin my childhood like that.
Their kind of heyday, the 90s and the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching a podcast of Eminem talking to Mike Tyson.
Top boxing.
Yeah. And they talk about, like, what drove them was they never felt like they were enough. And it kind of sucks a little bit, but like, I never felt like I was enough as an athlete. And I just, I've spoke about it before, I distinctly remember the first year that representative rugby came around at my age group, I made it. And the second year I got cut. I never made it back. And I asked this coach, I said, why have I been cut? He goes, well, they want big, strong, fast, fit players, and you're none of those things. Which, to tell a 15-year-old, you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
And I'm very good at having a chip on my shoulder and driving myself to be like, right, I'm going to prove you wrong. I can tell you, it's always the most recent failure that pushes you. Mm-hmm. So it was like, right, well, I'm going to I'm going to be a strength coach, and I'm going to stay in professional rugby. I'm going to be in professional rugby, and I'm going to prove you wrong that I can be in that environment and you can't. And I can tell you now, when I was an intern 10 years ago, I started 10 years ago last week, there was one senior coach. The sum of what he said to me in the year that I was there was pick up that bottle. What a dick. So I'm like, right, I'm going to make it, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that to people that came there before me. The time I failed at Sydney Roosters, I'm going to prove them wrong. You know, a year after that, we made the World Cup semi-final. So one away from the big one. And now it's in my nature to take the most recent failure and be like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. But you may have just detected there's a moving goalpost here. So if you gave me a postcard that summed up my resume now, 10 years ago last week, and said, this is what you're going to achieve in the next 10 years, would you be happy? I'd be like, unquestionably.
Yeah.
But it's, if the journey doesn't bring you joy, the destination never will. So not by any means am I like serene and wise and at peace, but there, if you want to be happier, there has to be a shift where it's not necessarily about proving somebody wrong or chasing the goal. It's more about the impact in relationships. And you, don't get me wrong, I like to win. I tell people, if I had to step over you to win, I would tread on your throat just to be sure. But having had the benefit of 10 years to look back on, I still get contacted by athletes that I coached as teenagers that are now in the England squad. And, you know, this guy name dropped me on a big podcast in the UK. And I actually had a business call with somebody. He goes, oh, I just heard your name in a podcast, which helps. You know, this guy came out to visit me in Tokyo for off season. Years after I stopped coaching him. And those kind of relationships are the stuff that you'll take with you. You won't forget the little details about, oh, I had this argument, or I proved this person wrong, or I won this game. Those are the relationships that you take with you. And then obviously having a child that doesn't care, oh, I just want an argument on the internet about back squats and Olympic lifting. You know what? That's the biggest indictment of the coaching field.
Yeah.
Is the sacrifices that you make in the name of sport, and your kids on the losing end. That's heavy. So it is, to me, it has to be more now, because I'm getting older a little bit as well. I want, what's my impact going to be? What's my legacy going to be when I leave? What would they say that was my contribution? So it's nice to win, but if I won the World Cup and everyone thought I was a prick, I failed.
Well said.
I want to have it all. I want to win, and
yeah. But the relationships that you form throughout your career are those bigger trophies that mean a lot more than the shiny ones that are on the mantle.
Yeah, you know, they're
gonna win. Yeah.
You know, two athletes in the US. You know, I was pretty lucky. Never had an athlete die until getting to the US. And then, you know, the two teams that I was at lost two in a year. And guess what? Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. We had one guy who took his life, and we had another guy who was murdered. And those kind of experiences will crystallize very quickly for you what is important and what is not. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. Geez, when you put things in perspective like that makes me not want to ask this next question. But
we can talk about Olympic lifting.
No. So you touched on how you'll program. You said 5, right? You have 5 different programs for your team.
Mm-hmm.
One was a max strength. One was a rate of force development program, injury mitigation program. Like, how different do those programs actually look when I'm assuming you hand out cards, like
team builder.
Oh, okay. So when they're looking at so when they're looking at their team builder, how different do those actually look from a day-to-day standpoint? Like, are you having certain guys hang clean, or are you having certain guys just trap bar jump, or just, you know what I mean? Like, how different does that actually look when it comes down to the day-to-day stuff?
Here's the thing. Are you familiar with the Bondarchuk system?
And no, I mean, I've read some of the work, but I
Okay.
can't say I'm like that deep into it.
I never really fully grasped it until I got to speak to his translator. So you should bring him on. His name's Jake Jensen. But
Okay.
there's this pyramid, right? At the very, very top is the competition exercise. You're doing your event, you're doing variations of the event or pieces of it, and that's going to have the highest transfer. If you're Usain Bolt, the only thing that makes you faster is sprinting.
Yeah.
Out the blocks, fly 10s, all that kind of stuff. One level below that is called a specialized developmental exercise. High degree of specificity, very high intensity of execution, looks really similar. So for a thrower, it may be that would be a competition exercise. So, let's say for a sprinter, jumps, plyometrics, sled sprints, downhill sprints. Highly specific, a little bit different.
Yeah.
Level below that, it just gets progressively more general.
Yeah.
Okay? And then at the bottom, you've got stuff, there's no correlation whatsoever. Within the Bondarchuk system, a specialized developmental exercise or a competition exercise, you are effectively saying as the coach, if we do this exercise, I have a high degree of confidence, if not certainty, that we will see an improvement in the field of play. Yep. Mm-hmm. Or in the sport. If I do this, I'm going to improve. In field-based sports, if you make somebody bigger, stronger, faster, fitter, are you going to have a high degree of confidence or near certainty that they're going to be a better football player, soccer player, basketball player?
No, I don't. Not necessarily.
Not at all, because you haven't actually considered the psychoperceptual element, right? So within that system, anything you do as the physical preparation coach is general specific at best.
Yeah.
Because you increase those outputs and then you do this.
Yeah.
And then you hope that they realize it on the field of play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by definition, the more general something is, the more interchangeable it becomes, right?
Yeah.
So there are no mandatory exercises within physical preparation. And the arguing of this exercise over that exercise is like arguing the method of delivery of a drug. Should the drug be a nasal spray? Should it be an injection? Should it be a suppository? What is the drug itself is the loading parameters of the exercise. So we're saying the intensity, the volume, the method of execution, the frequency throughout the week, how it's progressed. So within reason, and this is where the logistical side comes in, you're always going to have everyone more or less on the same page when you're dealing with large groups.
Right. Yeah.
So everyone in football is going to sprint, change direction, some kind of contact work. They're going to do high-speed ballistic efforts like jumping, plyometrics, and medicine ball throws. They're going to do some kind of grinding ballistic effort. So basically moderate to heavy loads for maximal speed, intent, projection. They're going to lift heavy weights. They're going to do accessories, and they're going to condition. Everyone. But how much of a drug you need to retain a quality versus develop a quality is very, very different.
Yeah.
How many sets does it take to retain strength? I've done it in professional rugby with a total of 10 sets twice a week with sub-maximal intensities, but just lifted with a lot of intent, and they maintain strength. How much do you need to develop strength? 10 singles above 90% when you're really getting to it. So we're always going to keep a thread of everything throughout the year, but how much you do of different things and the frequency with which you do them and how you do them will obviously change according to what we've decided your limiting factor is. So for example, if you're in the injury risk mitigation group and you have persistent hamstring problems, how will we realize speed training? It's probably going to be up a hill with a sled, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. If
you're in the speed development group, it might be that we just keep chucking fly 10s at you until you drop by 5% for your max that day. Okay. So it's how we deliver the program that tends to vary. And then really in off season, we're concerned with the outputs. So we're concerned about how big, strong, fast, powerful can you get? And when we get to the preseason, we're concerned with your outputs specific to the movement patterns in which you make your money. So we're really interested in the volume of sprinting that the mids and the skillies do during preseason. And for the skillies, we're mostly talking about a lot of, we call them gear changes, like split 20, fast, slow, fast. Really good for special teams. Fly 10s, agility stations. Like we try and have like specific agility drills, but without the ball. When we talk about guys in the box, it's a lot more of the grappling elements, the manipulating people where they don't want to be, not as much speed, and if they do, it's going to be resisted. So that's where the differences lie according to the different phases.
Yeah.
You dose that, like, I guess what's your guys' frequency, specifically in season? Because I tended to keep frequency, at least with my basketball and soccer athletes, more with shorter durations of training. Like that was kind of like, just so I felt like it was kept me more confident to play.
Yeah. So there's always going to be a need. Well, this is actually one of the difficult things about training is the longer you train, the more specific training you need, but you still have to keep enough of the general stuff in there that it doesn't become a limiting factor.
Right.
So when you get to a high training age, it doesn't mean never do general training because there's value to it.
Yeah.
But you have to do the minimum amount possible and then concentrate on the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about the in-season period, the in-season, they're doing all that practice, they're doing all the games. That's the most specific thing they can do, right? So there's a high volume of SPP. So it almost flips again, where your job as a strength coach during the in-season period is to stimulate those general qualities that are fundamental to performance that don't get stimulated by practice or competition, which is typically going to be the maximal outputs, because the way that sports is set up is that typically you're not working maximally because you have to control yourself and wait for an opportunity to go. And then the time motion characteristics of sport, they're not conducive to maximal outputs. So if this is the game, when you get to the in-season, you're going to train here and you're going to train here. You're going to train above and below the sport. So what you alluded to is you want reasonably high intensity activity in season because that's what's going to stimulate the retention or the slow improvement in maximal speed, especially maximal power, particularly, and then maximal strength, not necessarily. We would not go above 75 to 85% in season. And then underneath that, you're doing like that kind of like recuperative pull cardio, move like a human being the day after a game, maybe get a pump, do some extensive jumps, some extensive med balls, just to keep ticking over.
Some slow work.
Yeah, that's basically it. So for us, we would come in on a Sunday because guess what? It's really hard to misbehave on Saturday if you're in the gym the next morning. We'll go through, we call it like an anatomical warm-up. We get all their joints moving. We just get them like loosey-goosey, and we go through an ISO circuit. So, isometrics for tendinopathy. Can you do long duration holds so we can like remodel that collagen, hopefully, get an analgesic effect, and we let them in the gym. They do a push-pull, and then we call it like beach weights. They do a beach circuit. Get some more training, get some feeling good, and maybe there's a little bit of retention of muscle mass. And we'll microdose some medicine ball throws because we can train rate of force development without eccentric loading, which obviously that close to the game you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Monday off, Tuesday we come in and we actually do extensive jumps for the most part because we feel that's sufficient to retain power output with all the explosive efforts they do in the field and then the impact and so on. Then we actually do a whole body daily undulating periodization in season. So on the Tuesday is whole body maximal strength, push, pull, lower body. And then if they feel really good, we'll give them a little bit at the end of some single leg work, some posterior chain, and maybe a torso exercise, but it's optional. On the Wednesday is whole body power. So that's when we'll do a push, a pull, a lower body, and a whole body. So this might be where we do like an Olympic lift, but we'll do a watered down Olympic lift that we can do with guys that may be feeling beat up.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the Friday, we do an optional primer. So we're training push, pull, lower body, twist, and some form of sprint. Very low volume, high intensity. So we're trying to ramp them up into Saturday. So what Dan Paff calls acute relieving syndrome is basically you do not want them relaxing on a Friday because the body's just going to be like, and you actually want to be getting ready to mobilize against that stressor on a Saturday. So what we're trying to do, if you look at that week, we're training the full force velocity curve. We're microdosing in speed throughout the week. I should have said we do fly 10s on the field in season on a Tuesday. And we are just trying to, like what you said, dose it out throughout the week so we get as much training as we can with the minimum kind of like fluctuation in fatigue. And it's almost, again, it's two counteracting things. High volatility and variations in fatigue and readiness is usually associated with you're really stressing the body into adaptation. But it also means you're going to suck every other day, which you don't want in season. So you're actually trying to minimize those fluctuations day to day in the season.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Keir, I really appreciate you. I'm sure Sean appreciate, like, this is awesome. There's a lot of things that I'm going to take away from this.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you definitely like forced me to think about things in a way I haven't thought about for sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's awesome. That's what I want.
That's what this is project of ours is for. Like we want to open our own minds because that's the only way we're going to be able to get to learn to move our own goalposts.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Well,
thank you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, man.